So I don't have a problem with race. The majority of people I know, I hear from, don't have a problem with race. So why does Kamala continue to fuel the destruction of the race issue in America? I mean, everything that comes out of Kamala's mouth is black this, black that, white is bad. She doesn't want anybody to know the truth about anything. I put together a video. I hope it will explain why they continue to fuel the race wars here in America.
Because it is our Constitution and our fundamental freedoms enshrined in our Constitution and Bill of Rights that are under attack. We can have disagreements in our politics as we discuss the great challenges and the great issues that we face. But it is times like this, when those very freedoms are under threat, that we must stand together, united as Americans who cherish peace and freedom and who love this great country. It's easy to forget sometimes that our founding fathers also had disagreements on different things. They debated fiercely in private and in public, but they came together around the things that were most important. And it is our freedom. It is our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're dealing with an administration and a government and an establishment in Washington that views our freedom as the greatest threat to their power. And they are willing to do, as we have seen over these last 4 years, whatever it takes to hold on to that power.
My mother understood very well that she was raising 2 black daughters. She knew that her adopted homeland would see Maya and me as black girls, and she was determined to make sure we would grow into confident, proud black women.
You are Indian.
Yes.
So we're both Indian,
Yes.
but actually we're both South Indian.
Yes. You look like the entire one half of my family.
According to the Washington Post, Harris chose Howard because she wanted to be surrounded by black students, black culture, and black traditions at the crown jewel of historically black colleges and universities. At Howard, Harris joined Alpha Kappa Alpha, the oldest historically black sorority. In keeping with our respective Indian and Jewish heritage, I put a flower garland around Doug's neck. He stomped on a glass.
And in the former president, someone who has really been pushing an agenda and an environment that is about diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans, really dividing our nation.
They tried to get people all fired up on the issue of race, knowing that that's America's Achilles heel.
What Senator Harris is doing is unfortunately continuing to traffic in lies.
Well, let's be clear.
Kamala Harris stands under the spotlight, her stance indifferent to truth. A political operator navigating the maze of half-truths and ambiguity.
So here's how it got started. Florida's Board of Ed came out with their new Black History curriculum. Primetime looked at the curriculum. It's rigorous, it's in depth, it should be like that. It covers the darkest parts of American history, how slaves were shackled and trafficked from Africa, broken by their masters, and forced into atrocious conditions.
Her discourse morphs into a theater of strategic ambiguity, leaving observers to question the veracity of her statements.
But that's not all it covers. It's a brutally honest depiction of American slavery, the institution, and therefore covers slavery from the perspective of the slave, instead of just from the perspective of the master.
Her voice fuels a fervent conversation, compelling citizens to discern the authenticity of her commitment to factual transparency. In this pivotal moment, Kamala Harris finds herself in a landscape of ambiguity as observers navigate her statements to uncover whether her allegiance leans toward truth or strategic convenience.
The course examines the various duties and trades performed by slaves like agricultural work, painting, carpentry, tailoring, domestic service, blacksmithing, transportation. Instruction includes how slaves developed skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. That's the section everyone's freaking out about, especially Kamala Harris.
Right, and you absolutely quoted the curriculum correctly on this idea of slaves getting skills during that period that they used later. That is in the curriculum. It absolutely is, but it's much more than that. And I didn't read all 260 pages of this, but I did read some of it. And let me just give you an example of what's possibly more even-handed here. There's an entire study module that's entitled Resiliency, Contributions, and Influence of African Americans from the Colonial Era through the Westward Expansion. Look, this curriculum is more than one talking point, all right? There's a whole lot more going on here. And I feel like we've got to tell the story from various points of view. If you've studied history at all, you know it's complicated. You know it's nuanced. You have to tell everybody's point of view and make it clear that there was a lot going on. It's not just one story, one meme. There's more to it than that.
We agree. We have to be honest. American history is complicated, and it's worth having a conversation about, especially about how to teach it, as long as we can all agree to the full story. But we can't have an honest conversation with the likes of Kamala Harris or the likes of MSNBC. They don't want an honest conversation. Why is Kamala Harris so dishonest about how Black history is taught? Does she not want students to learn how resilient and capable Black Americans were during slavery and afterwards?
She's disappointed me several times, but I think the biggest thing that the opportunity that she really has blown is the fact that she made history being the first female African-American vice president. I mean, wow, what an opportunity. What an incredible achievement. And then to blow it the way she has done, she's been a mess on the border, to your point. She's been a mess on AI.
Look, you talk about disappointment from the Vice President Kamala Harris. I thought she missed a great opportunity right then. And by the way, that was such a setup question from the reporter. Like, oh, is it because you're Black and you're a woman? She easily could have said, no, it's not because of those things. No, it's not because I'm biracial, Indian, Black, and that I'm a female. I have work to do. How about acknowledging what hasn't worked? Taking some of those knives out of the hands of the woke folk and saying, no, it has nothing to do with my gender or my race. We had real problems, and I tried to lean in, and I haven't succeeded, but I'm not going to give up.
I don't believe the vice president cares. I don't believe the vice president is interested in the truth about the curriculum. The vice president is more interested in creating a wedge. It is essential that if we have courses on America's history, that we tell the whole story. And the whole story about slavery is one, that slavery began eons before the existence of America. It's also true that from 1500 to 1700, there were more Europeans being held as slaves than there were Blacks. It's also true that it was unjust and unfair when it happened in America. But America, like the whole Western society, ultimately rejected it. And now to be Black is to be an American, one of the most successful opportunities for any human being on the planet. In fact, a real narrative of slavery in America will also mention that some 10 to 12% of all slaveholders in America from 1790 to 1850 were Black. Again, we need a whole story, not one that divides us.
I mean, Kamala, don't you know what Florida's teaching its students? The two people who wrote Florida's African-American history curriculum, two African-American PhDs, are standing by it. Here's what they say. Any attempt to reduce slaves to just victims of oppression fails to recognize their strength, courage, and resilience during a difficult time in American history.
I'm saying that bad stuff rolls downhill, and the politics influenced how the people were treated. And so you have to tell the entire story of Reconstruction, the entire story. What liberals would have us believe is that we went from fighting the Civil War to we didn't start recovering until the 1960s. They would not have us believe that for 100 years we were moving in the right direction, not in the right place, but moving in the right direction. I know this because I grew up in Georgia and had to learn things like the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free slaves. Because the point of the Emancipation Proclamation was politics. And politics is the root to all evil. This entire curriculum shows you that there was slave trade in the Caribbean, there was slave trade in Africa, there was slave trade in Asia, there was slave trade in Europe, and there was slave trade in South America. At the same time, there was slave trade in the US. And I believe that liberals would have our youngest believe that we were so evil from our inception, we were the only ones doing evil. It's not to excuse our evil, and by all means, slavery is evil. Treating people like cattle is beyond evil. It's the worst thing I could imagine, because then you have to dive into what that really means. And this curriculum, from the bullet points I read, dives into that. This specific point she pulls out of, I think, 94 curriculum points, from my understanding, was pointed towards saying this is what slaves had to work with once they were freed.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion are everyone's responsibility.
You've been hearing about DEI training. It's supposed to make us aware of our unconscious prejudice. But a former DEI trainer, rhetoric professor Eric Smith, says today's DEI training does more harm than good.
People do need to be woken up.
Yeah, and that was the point. You know, diversity walk or something like that, when somebody says how many people grew up in a single parent household and things like that.
If you were encouraged to attend college by your parents and your family members, take one step forward.
The diversity or privilege walk is supposed to teach us how much more or less privilege we have.
If you grew up in a household with two parents, step forward. And at the end of it, you know, the most privileged people are in front and the least privileged people are in back. I did that, but it wasn't to guilt anybody. It wasn't to say, you know, you need to check your privilege. It was to say, look at the world here. Look at what's going on. We should be aware of these things.
Why not tell people to check their privilege? Some of us have privilege.
Yes, but some of us are accomplished, and that's being called privilege. And I think that's unfair. It's one thing to be born on third base and act like you hit a triple. It's another thing to be born on first base and still second, right? And again, third. You know, that's an accomplishment.
And that's frowned upon now?
Well, it's frowned upon by people who find it strategic to frown upon it, yes. If you can keep this race thing going, then you will always have a business in getting rid of racism.
Having served as President of the United States for 8 years, earning an annual salary of approximately $400,000, he made a total of $3.2 million as head of state. But without a doubt, the income responsible for Obama's enrichment came from his work as a writer. His memoir, Dreams from My Father, for example, published in 1995, achieved significant sales, resulting in a profit of $6.8 million. And according to Forbes magazine, his bestseller, Audacity of Hope, and the children's book, Of Thee I Sing, A Letter to My Daughters, earned Obama $8.8 million. Another more recent book, A Promised Land, was published in November 2020, selling nearly 890,000 copies in the US and Canada within 24 days of its release. Not to mention that he and his wife earn money by giving speeches. Some sources claim that the former First Lady earns $225,000, and the former president earns as much as $400,000 per performance. In addition to their millionaire literary empire, the couple earned handsome money in a creative production partnership they signed with Netflix. The $50 million annual deal requires the Obamas to produce a diverse mix of content, including series, documentaries, and feature films. And according to Forbes magazine, between 2005 and 2016, the couple earned an impressive $20.5 million.
Even Ibram X. Kendi proposed a branch of government, right, regarding anti-racism. And what do you need to justify that? You need racism. It's in his best interest to perpetuate racism, you know, in order to maintain a career. Then there are people who are like, wow, well, this is a, you know, billion-dollar industry. I'm going to get in on this. You know, do my trainings and things like that and accuse people of racism just to keep it perpetuated, right? To keep it going so that it never goes away, so that I keep making my money or
It is a
clout.
multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yes, it
now.
is.
Every big company.
Yeah.
They feel they have to.
Right, and there it is. They feel like they have to. They have to say something. They have to signal to the world that they're doing something. Whether that something is effective or not is secondary.
Is it effective?
It doesn't seem to be effective, no. In fact, it seems to be doing worse. It seems to be making people less likely to interact with people who are unlike them, you know, because it's like a minefield now.
less likely to interact.
Yes, yes, yes. After a training where you hear things about microaggressions, right? Microaggressions. If you ask somebody what they do for a living, somehow that's racist, right? If you learn that, then why would you take a chance?
I better not talk to Eric because I might say something wrong.
Precisely.
Any other ideas about this not working?
Well, if you compel people, to go to certain things just out of pure resentment, they may, back away and rebel. I saw that myself even when I was doing diversity training that wasn't especially woke.
All this money is spent, all these courses, all this time. Why doesn't it get the results they want?
Well, it might be getting the results they want. Depends on who you mean by they.
Why doesn't it bring racial harmony to the office?
Because diversity, equity, and inclusion, those words don't mean what most people think they mean. Diversity is diversity of bodies, of skin color, ethnicity, not of thought. You can have many different bodies, but they have to be, basically on the same page ideologically. That page is often something akin to critical social justice. Inclusion means, well, you can't make people uncomfortable. And in a world of microaggressions, that's easy to do. So now inclusion means I'm going to silence myself and not talk to the black people, right? And equity, as most people know, does not mean equality. It means equality of outcome, right? We have to make sure everybody ends up at the same place, no matter how they got there.
Medical standards, DEI is causing medical standards to be lowered. Do you actually believe people are dying because of that?
I believe that if we lower the standards for what it takes to become a doctor.
You're saying if we lower the standards,
Yes.
but do you believe people are dying because the standards are being lowered?
I don't
Or have
think
been
that
lowered?
is yet an issue, but it could become an issue.
Okay. But the actual evidence in history shows the exact opposite. If you look at how minorities are treated by the medical system, most doctors now are white. And there are lots of mistakes in medicine. So you're saying that white doctors have bad medical care? I'm trying to understand your logic here when it comes to DEI because there's no actual evidence of what you're saying.
No, I said, so if the standards, like let's say, I think that particular thing was referring to surgeons. Let's say a surgeon is asked to, a surgeon in training is asked to do a series of operations under the supervision of a senior surgeon, and they get a bunch of those operations wrong. If that happens, and yet they are still approved to be a surgeon, the probability that someone will die, I think, at some point is high.
Okay, I understand that, but that's a hypothetical. That doesn't mean it's happening.
I didn't say it's happening.
You didn't say it was happening.
I said it will. I said if we lower standards, people will die.
But why respond to something or put something out there that has not happened? Because I could say,
Because I don't want it to happen. I think we don't want to lower standards.
Okay, if you look at the history of the medical industry, especially when it comes to Black Americans, it shows the exact opposite. If you look at the Tuskegee experiment and on, only 5% of doctors in America are Black. All of them are white. So are you saying that if the majority of doctors are white, are you saying that and there are still these inequities, right? And there's still mistakes. Are you blaming DEI for that?
No, I'm very basically saying that if we lower standards for what it takes to become a board-certified surgeon or an oncologist or something where the kind of disease we're talking about, if you make a mistake, causes someone to die, then more people will die than if we don't lower the standards. Therefore, we should not lower the standards.
But why do you think they're lowering the standards for minority doctors or women doctors or?
That's what that's what that article suggested. Yes, at Duke University.
Okay. The evidence that I have shows that that's not true.
Which is why we get rid of aptitude tests, which is why we get rid of AP classes, which is why we have equitable math and things like that. That's equity.
Because there were too many Asians and whites in the AP class.
Apparently, or not enough Black people. And that's interesting. it's easy to say people are doing this out of resentment, right? But some people may be doing this out of love. You know, is it hate for white people or love for black people? You know, and what's motivating them? Now, yes, they're still misguided, but they see this as, well, the ends justify the means, and the ends are racial equality and black dignity, so I'm gonna do what I have to do. We have, you know, to get to where we want to go. And if we keep saying, well, there's nothing we can do, we can't win because of the white oppressor, then what is that going to do to an entire group of people? Nothing good.
Could you promote an organization that judged your ancestors on the color of their skin and not the content of their character, never even asked them a simple question, but because they were solely black, put them in chains and make them work on a field? And
the
these
KKK
are the people
didn't do that.
The KKK is a terrorist group, and it's the longest standing
And so
terrorist
is Black
group
Lives Matter.
in Los Angeles. Black Lives Matter is not a terrorist group.
So let me ask.
Black Lives Matter is simply an affirmation to black people that we matter, because we don't see it enough in our community. Nobody tells us, not even our parents sometimes, that we matter. So when we say Black Lives Matter, it's not saying that you don't matter. It's not saying that we matter more than somebody else. It's saying that we matter, and I can tell myself that I matter, just like I can tell myself that I'm beautiful, right? To affirm it to myself.
So is that a no about the KKK performing? You wouldn't support that?
Okay, first of all, let me get this straight. So you said the Black Panthers had people scared in Chicago, right? They had people scared to sell drugs in the neighborhood. They had people scared to prostitute women in the hood. The Black Panthers they started the free meal program. They started WIC program, which the government has started to take over because they fed communities, right? And so when you have the KKK who started things like Halloween, where they dress up in masks and go firebomb houses, black houses where they hang people from trees, have parties with black people hanging from trees like strange fruit, if you've ever touched up on your black history. But you have these KKK terrorist organization groups that have tormented black people for years, African people for years, but they are not labeled as a terrorist group. So then you have a black group emerging from the community called Black Lives Matter, and now we have to be a terrorist group, and we're here to rebuild the community, to hit the capitalist white supremacist society right in its face and stop it and say, hey, this is not right.
Okay, so let me go back to the question. Is that a no for the KKK performing this year?
Only if you're on the cross.
I'm sorry?
Only if you're on the cross.
I'm on the cross?
Yeah.
And then you'll be okay with it?
Yeah.
Why are you so mean?
I'm not mean.
Why would you want to put me on the cross because we disagree?
Because
where's the love in that?
Where's the love in you?
Where's the love? Hold on. You said that Black Lives Matter make black people feel worthy and beautiful?
No, I didn't say we make people feel. I said it is a positive affirmation to ourselves.
They affirm you?
Yes.
And what do they affirm about you?
It affirms my being and the positivity in my being and the purpose in my being.
You didn't feel that way prior to Black Lives Matter? You did not feel that way?
No.
Why not?
Because the way that society is set up, it makes me feel that as a woman, there are things that I shouldn't have. There's a specific way that I should act. And that because I'm black, my chances of everything is significantly lowered.
So your parents did not make you feel worthy while raising you?
They told me I was beautiful.
And they
told me I was smart. They told me I was important. But yes, I believe them. But
so why do you need Black Lives Matter?
Because the way that you are treated and what you are told are two different things. My mom told me I was beautiful now and I was smart. But when I go into society, they don't see that beauty. They don't see that intellect. Society. Just because I'm black.
Who are you referring to in society?
I'm referring to the structure.
Are you talking about
the whole
white people, or black people, and white people and others? Who are you talking about? Are you talking about white people?
I'm not talking about a person.
Specifying any particular
I'm not talking about a person.
But somebody has to be the system that you're referring to.
It's a thinking. See, we have to
who
understand
are you referring
that it's not a people.
But who are you
thinking?
And who is thinking?
I'm referring to the government.
Who is thinking this way?
The people who wrote our laws.
Who is that? Are you talking about white people, black people, Mexican, or them all?
White people.
You talking about white people?
Mr. Peterson, if I
Hold on a minute. Hold on. I'll come to you. You're talking about white people?
I gave you what you're looking for, huh?
No, are you talking about white people?
Yeah, I'm talking about anyone who wants or feeds into white supremacy in this structure.
So you're talking
anybody,
about
whether they
whites
be
and
white,
blacks
black,
and
Asian,
others.
Latino, whoever.
Oh,
If you
okay.
agree with this white capitalist, white supremacist structure, then okay,
Andre-
that's for you. But if you don't agree, because there's a variety of all the races who don't agree,
So it's
as
not-
do agree.
Oh, okay. So Andre, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say that I don't think it's a people. It seems to be a majority of people that have this racist thinking that I must keep this race oppressed so that I can stay superior. Although, I mean, our history do show.
Who are you referring to now?
I'm telling you that it's a thinking that's in
And
society.
who's doing this thinking in society?
It's been the Caucasian race for
So the white
ages.
race is holding you back.
No one's holding me back
The
because I
white
create
race
my
are
own.
discriminating against you.
Because of my
Yes.
race, yes. It's sad.
And they have set up a system to where
that?
they don't have to discriminate, but they have a system that does it.
Where's my proof?
Yeah.
The fact that as a young black man growing up in this society, my parents had to tell me that I had to do things 4 times better than the Caucasian person just to survive in this country.
So your
But me
parents told you that?
Hold on. But me being a person that's objective and I can see both sides of the coin, I go into society, I do the same thing as my fellow classmates. Yet I realize that I do have to do more to get into society. The fact that before I go on the job interview, I have to figure out what I'm gonna do with my hair because my texture of hair is not what America deems job appropriate. So I have to go and cut my hair, although I believe that this is where my strength is, because I am the only person on this earth that has this kind of hair, that can have any hairstyle without doing anything.
You believe your hair is your strength?
All of this is my strength. That I have strength in here that I can't even contain. And I think that is a reason why we have this issue with everything black people do. It's called a protest, an outrage. It's because we are passionate people.
No, you're very angry people.
Oh.
Would you include yourself in that?
No, I'm not angry.
I actually wanted to ask you, what is your nationality?
Hold on, I was angry like you people at one point.
I'm not angry.
But I
You're
was
not saying
able
that
to
I'm
overcome it, and I realized that I had been lied to. You guys, most black people are so angry, you're at a point now that no race like you.
Okay. But
Not just the white race, isn't that right? It's not just the white race, the
200
Hispanic.
years of racism.
The Hispanics don't like you, the
60
blacks
years
don't
of
like
Jim Crow.
you
I
know.
mean, constantly being told that we're less than,
No,
yet
but-
you go and get Botox and tanning
Andre.
salons and all this to look like
Andre.
us. You
And
perm
to
your hair,
address
you
the-
crochet your hair to get
Andre,
locks,
Andre,
but we're
Andre.
ugly.
Andre,
I'm just
calm
saying,
down.
we would have a reason to be
So let me ask, how do you feel knowing that most races do not like black people now because they're fed up with your bullying, they're fed up with your complaining and blaming and doing all that. You're turning off most people. How do you feel about that, Andre?
I would have to disagree with you on that statement, seeing that the
No, I hear from
million-
them all the
Okay,
time.
Okay, hold on. Let me get my point across. You hear from them, but I see them, and I think actions are a lot better than words. When I see black and brown doing a march on Washington, that's race relations
Well, those
right there.
just those
That's
radical,
great.
angry-
That's
angry,
great. When I see Asian people standing outside the White House marching with Black Lives Matter, yes, yes. When I see people of other cultures going, you know what? See, this is what we have to do as a people. We have to wake up.
What do you
We got to
want?
stop
What
listening
is
to
it
this
that you
rhetoric
want?
that's in the media.
Michelle, what do you people want?
What do I want?
Michelle.
When you say you people, what do you mean?
The complaining black people blaming others for the failure of their parents and their lives,
What complaint
blaming
have we
others for whatever it is you complain about. What is it exactly do you want from white people?
First of all, I'm just going to take a breath. And
I'm trying to find out what you want.
what's your nationality?
American.
Are you white?
I'm black American. Oh, okay. What do you want? Oh, you do? And why do you think that? Why do you think that?
Because you seem to separate yourself from from us, should I say?
In
put
what
us on
way?
the other side
In what
of the
way?
fence. In the ways that you've specified thus far.
Meaning what? Tell me, give me an example and tell me what you mean.
How you mean? What do you people want from white people? Meaning that I'm not with you.
Oh, okay, I
It's
got
just y'all by yourself, right?
Let me explain why I do that. What you don't know is that there are two realities in life. One is that of good and one is that of evil. And now that I've been able to overcome evil, I don't identify with angry, evil black people. I identify with other blacks and others who are on the side of good. And so that's why I say you people, because I have to divide myself or separate myself from evil and go along with good. So that's why I do that.
What is it that makes us evil?
I'm sorry, your anger, your blaming others for your problems, your lack of love and respect for yourself and others.
Okay, well, that's another reason why I wanted to come on the show, because that has been a misrepresentation, right? We're not angry, we're not pointing the finger.
But you're blaming white people for your downfall.
No, we're not blaming white people for our downfall. Basically, we're just saying when the so-called Emancipation Proclamation was passed, a certain system was also set in place to make sure black people didn't make it that far.
What do you want at this point?
And what's it going to do if you say being on time is not a good thing?
Right. Or that, a standardized English, at least having proficiency in it, is a form of oppression. What are you really doing? I mean, if you wanted to hold down a group of people without them knowing it, this woke thing is a good strategy.
We have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke.
What's so funny about woke?
Cause a lot of us to be woke.
She is the favorite to be our new president?
And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke. Yeah.
Another example, this is a LinkedIn course by Robin DiAngelo.
Yes, inspired by Robin DiAngelo anyway, yes.
Inspired.
Yes.
And this blew up on the internet. Why?
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, it was Coca-Cola that got caught doing this. I show this to my students every semester as an exigence. So what do you do, conflict management? What do you do when your company does this? I actually use that example as a kind of lesson. But what was happening there is a diversity training in which whiteness in general was the problem. And the thesis statement, if you will, of this training was try to be less white.
Try to be less white means?
Try to be less European or Eurocentric or more Enlightenment driven. Try to be less classically liberal.
Be less oppressive. Be less arrogant. Be less ignorant. It's reasonable.
That is by no means a white thing. But the point is to demonize the other side as much as possible. Marcuse called this repressive tolerance. Nothing the other side can do can be accepted. We have to demonize them in all ways.
And the white leaders of these groups pay money to be trashed.
Yeah, it's a rite of passage.
Hundreds of studies suggest anti-bias training doesn't reduce bias.
I believe that. Yeah, what it's doing is creating more chaos, in certain places.
Understand, it's not necessary for people to believe this information in order to weaken democratic institutions. You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing.
Now, maybe there are places that are having, big issues with race relations and things like that, and that can be dealt with in various ways. But some places are, people are getting along, right? They're working well together. But the implicit bias training is put there because human resources said we have to do this, right? And now we're thinking about things like, I want to ask this guy what time it is, but is that bad? In some way, that has to be bad now, right? So you get people apprehensive and they're not talking to each other anymore.
That citizens no longer know what to believe. Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
Hundreds of studies suggest anti-bias training doesn't reduce bias.
I believe that. Yeah, I mean, what it's doing is creating more chaos, in certain places. Now, maybe there are places that are having, big issues with race relations and things like that, and that can be dealt with in various ways. But some places are, people are getting along, right? They're working well together. But the implicit bias training is put there because human resources said we have to do this, right? And now we're thinking about things like, I want to ask this guy what time it is, but is that bad? In some way, that has to be bad now, right? So you get people apprehensive and they're not talking to each other anymore.
Asking people to suppress stereotypes tends to reinforce them.
Well, now you're thinking about it more, right? If you're constantly thinking about, oh, am I going to say something wrong? Then you're thinking about saying something wrong. You're thinking about those stereotypes. So yes, it puts these things in the forefront of our minds, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
Researchers looked at 800 companies after mandatory DEI trainings. 5 years later, no increase in diversity of hiring. Companies actually saw a 9% fall in how many black women were hired.
It's one thing to say they don't work. It's another thing to say they make things worse, right? You would think that people would see that data and change their minds or change their methodologies or something like that. It's not about
data
that,
doesn't
though.
seem to have much to do with it.
No, it's not. It doesn't have much to do with it. It's not about data. It's not really about material change, right? It's about a power grab. It's about a culture change.
And they're winning, it seems to me.
They're winning in certain contexts, yes. They seem to be winning in my field anyway, of rhetoric and composition.
I'd like to ask you about one of the existing and persisting divides here in America right now, which is just acknowledging what the problems are that need addressing. And I want to ask you about the Republican rebuttal to President Biden's first joint address to Congress that came from Senator Tim Scott, because one line in particular caught a lot of people's attention. He said, hear me clearly, America is not a racist country. And he argued that Democrats actually ignore racial progress for political gain. First, I'd love just to get your reaction on what you thought when you heard that line, but also to reflect on the idea that this is not a policy difference. This seems to be a very fundamentally different view of what problems exist in the US. So how do you bridge those divides?
Much like Senator Scott, I grew up in the South, and it is very easy to grow up in the same place and have a very different view of what's happening. If I'm going to be charitable, I would say that his point is that not every American you meet is racist in their intent or their behavior. But racism is a system. It is not simply about individual actions, and that has been part of the challenge of combating racism. If it has to be overt, if it must be grotesque, then we allow 95% of the incidences to go unchallenged and to go unnoticed. I believe that we have systemic racism in the United States that requires response. I believe there are portions of our nation that are indeed grounded in racist systems. And I believe this nation has not gone far enough. Yes, we have made progress, but the deep hole we began in is not one we have climbed out of yet. But I also recognize that there's something aspirational in his language and his tone. And that is what we should attempt to reach. But where we disagree is how close we are. But where we also disagree is whose responsibility it is. And I would argue that it is absolutely the responsibility of anyone who stands for public office to serve the realities of those they stand for, and to ignore the very real examples of systemic racism, whether it's the deployment of vaccines and the deployment of medication, the refusal of southern states to expand Medicaid, the inaction that we have seen on police and justice. And we are seeing Tim Scott step up to try to address that. But we have to have a uniformity of understanding that as long as racism exists in any system that is in America, then that stands as a marker of where America stands. And that is what we must address.
Yes, I started way before I was at the top of the ticket at what I called an economic opportunity tour, focused on black men. Understanding that, for example, we have so many entrepreneurs in the community who do not have access to capital, but they've got great ideas, an incredible work ethic, the ambition, the aspiration, the dream, but don't have the relationships necessarily. So my work has included, as vice president, getting billions more dollars into community banks, including working with the big banks to do that, so that we can increase access to capital for our small businesses, for our startups.
I don't have a relative who is a black man, a friend or a colleague that I know who has not faced some kind of racial profiling or discrimination. So I have known it my whole life.
Without mass incarceration of African American men.
These segregationists pushed policies and really built their careers and reputations off of policies that were about segregation of the races in our country.
Citizens United really means citizens divided. And someone who has the ability to rebuild the Obama coalition.
Why would we call them domestic terrorist group?
Because they tried to use fear and force to change political environment.
Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
I do not see any parallels between sworn
I'm talking about perception.
officers and agents.
I'm talking about perception.
I do not see a parallel between what is constitutionally mandated as it relates to enforcing the law.
If ICE officers are racist for enforcing the immigration law, what's that make members of Congress? They wrote the law. Our president signed the law.
It should not require a maiming or torture in order for us to recognize a lynching when we see it and recognize it by federal law.
The stories about the power that these individuals had to fight a system that was unjust and to make it just.
So speaking of justice, I know that you attended at least one that I know of, one where you were caught, a BLM protest, kind of incognito.
I think Black Lives Matters is very important as an organization.
What do you say back to maybe some of his supporters and folks who are confused about what BLM actually stands for and what it means, especially with given the fact that Patrice and Opal and Alicia were on the front page or the cover of Time magazine as 100 women or 100 people now are changing the world.
New released tax filings show exactly how Black Lives Matter spent their donation money. William Lajeunesse has been digging through it all. What do you have for us, William?
Well, Stuart, here you have an $80 million foundation. Last year they had 0 board meetings and 1 board member. So that's not oversight. But the scrutiny is over use of donor money to hire friends and family. So 3 expenses stand out. BLM gave almost $1 million to Damon Turner, the father of the co-founders, Patrisse Cullors' child, to produce live events. $840,000 went to her brother, Paul, for security. Cullors also admits hiring her mother and sister to work at BLM's LA mansion.
I think it's important that people understand that while my brother is the head of security and my mom and sister did work at the property, it's not like I literally, opened up the bank accounts and was like, I'm bringing all my family and friends in. Folks had skill sets.
BLM also paid Shaloma Bowers $2.1 million for consulting. He and 2 others now serve on the board. BLM spent $1.2 million lobbying to impeach President Trump and eliminate bail. Cullors spent $73,000 on a private jet and used the LA mansion for 2 private parties, but later reimbursed BLM for both. BLM dispersed $25 million in grants to 31 groups. They banked $41 million, including $32 million in stock. Supporters blame any accounting flaws on inexperience.
I actually did not know what 990s were before all of this happened. Something's being weaponized against us that many people don't even know and honestly don't care about. It is such a trip now to hear the word, the term 990s. I'm like, ugh, it's like triggering.
Yeah, this 990 was the first time they've given any accounting over basically about 7 to 10 years at all, Stuart. Experts say family members should not receive donor money unless there are multiple bids and reviewed by an independent board. That didn't happen. As for accountability, BLM had 50,000 volunteers, 1 paid employees, and did not disclose any donors.
Well, and good for Time Magazine for doing that, because they have. And the brilliance and the impact of Black Lives Matter and their brilliance in conceiving it, history is going to show was an inflection point in the ongoing fight for justice, to your point, and to reform the criminal justice system and America's criminal justice system. I actually believe, as a former prosecutor, that Black Lives Matter has been the most significant agent for change within the criminal justice system, because it has been a counterforce to the force within the system that is so grounded in status quo and in its own traditions, many of which have been harmful and have been discriminatory in the way that they've been enforced. As a movement and on principle, it is important to make that statement. So being there, being at the protest, I mean, I grew up in protest. My parents were active in the civil rights movement, as you know, so it's nothing new. I've been in marches since I was in a stroller. When I was at Howard University, I was protesting against apartheid. I mean, it's nothing new for me. But being there at this point, in terms of honoring the life of George Floyd and Breonna and Ahmaud Arbery, and we can go down the list. Sadly, a long list. It is about, I think, a community and the country speaking out, understanding that nothing that we have achieved that has been about progress in this country has come without a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing that we have achieved in our country that has been about progress, in particular around civil rights, has come without a fight. And so I always am going to interpret these protests as an essential component of evolution in our country, as an essential component or mark of a real democracy, and as necessary.
You mentioned the name of George Floyd, and of course, you led the charge with Senator Booker and the Congressional Black Caucus on the House side for the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Is that a bill, Senator Harris, that you would urge Vice President Biden to sign into law in his first 30 days, for example, as president?
So the Justice in Policing Act, and yes, Cory Booker, my brother in the Senate, we led it on the Senate side, but then got a lot of senators to sign on to it. In the House side, our fellow members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and brought together a bipartisan group to support it. And it does a number of things which Joe Biden has, without any hesitation, said that he will do in our administration. Including banning chokeholds and carotid holds. Let's be clear, George Floyd would be alive today if those carotid and chokeholds had been banned. Creating a national standard for use of force. Why is that important? Well, because where there have been cases that might be able to go to court where an officer has used excessive force, it is often the case that the standard that's applied makes it difficult to actually prove the case and win the case. Because here's what happens. In many jurisdictions, in the case of excessive force, the question that is asked is, was the use of force reasonable? And as we know, you can reason away just about anything. So what we're saying is no, the fair question to ask is, was that use of force necessary?
The last time Harris and Waltz tangoed, he let rioters burn down Minneapolis and she bailed him out. Waltz blamed America for the Black Lives Matter riots and said they were exciting.
A society that does not put equity and inclusion at the center of it, is certainly going to eventually come to the places where we're at.
What kind of Midwestern dad with Midwestern values lets a city burn to a crisp and then lets crooked donors swoop in and buy up the real estate on the cheap? When haters were ripping down statues of Columbus, Waltz didn't stop them.
It was an act of civil disobedience that we need to make sure people feel that there is a proper outlet to address what are legitimate concerns around what they view as a genocidal monument that they have to walk to in their democracy.
The Minneapolis mayor was begging Governor Waltz to deploy the National Guard, and Waltz told the Guard, stand down. He told the police to surrender their precincts. And once the city was a pile of ashes, he defunded the police.
Black lives do matter.
75 cities are living through these protests. Many are in flames. More than half have imposed curfew. In Michigan, every car on this street is on fire, windows smashed, tear gas deployed. With so much division, chaotic confrontations have been taking place across the country.
During the George Floyd riots, when people were looting and setting fires, Harris tweeted, "Help post bail for those protesting."
I'm authorizing and talking to General Jensen to fully mobilize the Minnesota National Guard, an action that has never been taken in the 164-year history of the Minnesota National Guard.
Walz deployed the National Guard 3 days after Floyd's murder.
So that's what this election is about. It's about saying we know we matter. We know the power is with the people. Yes, we have not achieved the ideals of our country, yet we all know that too. Our unity is our strength, and our diversity is our power. They call them the Tennessee Three. These two young legislators who are in their 20s and another, Gloria, and they stood up and they insisted that the voices and the cries and the demands of the families and the students and the teachers and the preachers would be heard. And you know what happened? These other legislators turned off their mic. Didn't even entertain debating the issue. Like, debate the issue. Right. If you got something to say, yes. But don't silence the people.
If you look at how many minutes each of those members have spoken in the last few months, it's hours. Actually, they've spoken more on the House floor, I think, in the last few months, time-wise, more than I have in the last 5 years.
You know, those two young legislators in Tennessee, I look at the March for Our Lives, I look at all, they're young because they're saying, you know, if y'all can't figure this out, we're gonna march and we're gonna protest and we're going to do whatever we need to do.
It was a pretty chaotic night on Capitol Hill, to say the least, last night. As troopers removed protesters from the gallery, Representative Justin Jones was recording when he says Republican Representative Justin Lafferty pushed him and grabbed his phone. Here's part of the video posted by Representative Jones, and here is another view. House Speaker Cameron Sexton said last week it was, quote, at least equivalent, maybe worse, than the January 6th insurrection.
These kids that are just marching, I mean, you know, the Stoneman Douglas kids, at the Women's March, you know, there's so many things that are happening right now where people are taking to the streets, and we have to remember it's not about fighting against something, it's about fighting for something.
But when you disrespect Kamala Harris by saying you will call her whatever you want, I know you don't intend it to be that way. That's the history and legacy of white disregard for the humanity of black people.
Oh, so now you're calling me racist.
I didn't say. I just said you weren't a
BS.
racist.
That is complete.
No, you don't have to intend racism to accomplish
you are
it.
intending. You know what?
I
You know what's
didn't know her name.
disgusting
He's
to
trying
women
to do
is
it.
her disrespect of women. She doesn't know what a woman is, and if 25 years ago,
White women don't have the ability to tell black women who paid the price of blood to make this country what it is, to tell them they're not real women.
Today's Democratic Party believes that government has an important role to play in society. It fights against economic inequality. It advocates policies that battle racial and gender discrimination. But it wasn't always this way. The Democratic Party was once the party of white supremacy, supporting slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. To understand how the party made such a huge shift, you have to go back to its origins in the mid-1820s, when it sprung up supporting the presidential candidacy of a popular former general, Andrew Jackson. Jackson was an outsider, challenging the political establishment and the elites of his day, and his critics disparaged him as a jackass. But Jackson embraced the animal as a symbol of determination, and donkeys started appearing in newspapers to represent him and his followers. In the 1828 presidential election, which saw record-breaking popular participation, Jackson won in a landslide victory. So his supporters argued that they, and not the old elites, represented the popular will of the country, and they started calling themselves the Democratic Party. Jackson's administration immediately began expelling Native Americans living east of the Mississippi River, an issue that defined the new administration. After he signed the Indian Removal Act into law in 1830, 5 large tribes were rounded up and forcibly marched into territories and camps further west. And the Democrats' ambitions didn't stop there. In the 1840s, the party adopted the doctrine of manifest destiny, the idea that Americans, white Americans, were divinely entitled to dominate the whole North American continent. Democratic President James K. Polk put this idea into action, massively expanding U.S. holdings by annexing Texas, acquiring Oregon, and winning much of what's now the southwestern U.S. in a war with Mexico. But soon afterward, national politics devolved into bitter controversy over whether new states entering the Union should be permitted to allow slavery. Democrats said they should, since their support base was strongest in slaveholding states. Yet a new Northern party, the Republicans, sprang up in opposition to expanding slavery any further. When Republican Abraham Lincoln won the presidency, the South seceded and the Civil War began. Once the Civil War was over, the Republican Party was bitterly unpopular among white Southerners who wanted to maintain supremacy over former slaves. So the Democratic Party promised to limit federal government intervention on behalf of black citizens. Democrats became effectively the only political party in the South, aided by intimidation and suppression of black voters. Democrats also won on state and local levels, leading to the constant abuse of the rights of black citizens. As the 20th century began, the country was changing, and the Democratic Party was changing too. A handful of individuals and corporations had grown enormously rich and powerful, using their vast fortunes to influence politics. And as a reaction to this, some reformers began pushing an agenda of progressivism, arguing that the government should take more of a role in regulating big businesses and improving ordinary people's lives. At first, these progressive reformers were present in both parties. But it was Democrat Woodrow Wilson who won the presidency in 1912 and put much of this agenda into action over Republican resistance. So the Democratic Party became the main home for progressives, and the Republican Party became more the party of business. But it was the Great Depression of the 1930s that sealed the Democratic Party's new identity as the party of government activism. In an effort to combat the crippling economic situation, President Franklin Roosevelt signed what was then the largest package of domestic government projects in American history, calling it the New Deal. And in the process of doing this, his administration dramatically expanded the size of government. Yet the party was still split over race. By the mid-20th century, it contained Southerners who staunchly supported segregation, liberal reformers trying to end it, and many politicians who were just happy to look the other way. But in 1964, when the Senate voted on the Anti-Segregation Civil Rights Act, this shows how the progressive reformers in the party had gained the upper hand, steering the party away from its racist past towards equality and social justice. But the Democrats in the South voted against the Civil Rights Act, remaining wedded to the idea of segregation. This chart shows the presidential vote for black voters. Around the 1960s, black voters who had already been moving towards the Democratic Party would begin overwhelmingly supporting the Democrats from then on, and conversely, the Republicans would take a huge hit among black voters. Meanwhile, white Southerners moved away from the Democratic Party they had been loyal to for so long, in part because of race, but also because of a suspicion of big government and a desire to defend traditional values against liberal activists. Democrats would go from dominating the South to losing almost all influence in the region. Thanks in part to this drop in popularity among white voters, Democrats started losing elections, often losing by huge margins. But demographically, the US is becoming an increasingly non-white country, and the Democrats have had a comeback thanks in part to minority voters. The huge influx of Hispanic voters has especially benefited Democrats. These demographic shifts helped the Democratic Party, once the advocates of white supremacy and slavery, to elect the first black president in 2008, showing just how much the party had changed over the years.
Brothers and sisters, I don't know what this world is coming to.
We resist those attacks collectively, and we will stand together.
Do we believe in freedom? Support human rights. We believe in that.
Standing on the shoulders of giants, Kamala Harris is the candidate who encompasses the brilliance, determination, analysis, and the action to carry the torch lit by the founders of the movement.
The civil rights movement has been a key part of organizing the agenda, not just of the Democratic Party, but of democracy.
There's a direct line from 64, the National Democratic Convention, where Fannie Lou Hamer asked to be seated, and 2024, where a black woman is the Democratic nominee. It's been a long struggle and a long journey, but Fannie's going to be vindicated, and Shirley Chisholm's going to be vindicated in the 24 Democratic Convention.
Melanie Campbell, President and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation and National Convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. We have come this far by faith. And for Black women, this moment has been a long time coming.
I'm Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP, and I'm here to do my black job.
It was in 1964 in Atlantic City, and she arrived with a group of black delegates from Mississippi. And she simply asked that her delegates be seated in place of the state's all-white delegation. She told the people in the room about the violence she suffered at the hands of white police. We both graduated from historically black colleges.
Since that day, every generation has carried the torch forward. In 1972, a fearless black congresswoman named Shirley Chisholm, she ran for president. And afterwards, we refused to give up on America. Millions marched, many ran for office. We kept our eyes on the future. Well, my friends, the future is here. There is always a choice. Do we push forward or pull back? Come together as we the people, or split into us versus them? That's the choice we face in this election. We're not just electing a president, we're uplifting our nation. We're opening the promise of America wide enough for everyone. This is our time, America.
With Kamala, her experiences have prepared her for this moment.
Now, we fight in our time to defend our freedom and our democracy against the banana Republicans who have converted Lincoln's party into a dangerous cult of personality.
She grew up in Waycross, Georgia, where she picked other people's cotton and other people's tobacco. But behind the big lie was an even bigger lie. It is the lie that this increasingly diverse American electorate does not get to determine the future of the country.
A call for racial justice long overdue. We're facing an inflection point. One of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine the fate of our nation and the world for decades to come. That's not hyperbole, I mean it literally. We're in a battle for the very soul of America. I ran for president in 2020 because of what I saw in Charlottesville in August of 2017. Extremists coming out of the woods, carrying torches, their veins bulging from their necks, carrying Nazi swastikas, and chanting the same exact anti-Semitic bile that was heard in Germany in the early 30s. Neo-Nazis, white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan, so emboldened by a president then in the White House that they saw as an ally. They didn't even bother to wear their hoods. Hate was on the march in America. Old ghosts and new garments, stirring up the oldest divisions, stoking the oldest fears, giving oxygen to the oldest forces that they long sought to tear apart America. To be a nation where we not only live with but thrive on diversity. I'm proud that I've kept my commitment to have an administration that looks like America and that taps in to the full talent of our nation. The most diverse cabinet in history, including the first black woman of South Asian descent to serve as vice president.
And I, for one, am tired of hearing about how a two-bit union buster thinks of himself as more of a patriot than the woman who fights every single day.
Change and freedom are the drumline of our democracy.
Something we've worked for and dreamed of for a long time.
We can tell Donald Trump, night-night. Thank you. My grandma, a civil rights warrior, called me, her voice cracking, and she said, "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I thought my generation had fixed this. And here you are, fighting the same battles."
Let me close on a personal note. As the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in American history, I want my grandkids and all grandkids to never, never face discrimination because of who they are. But Donald Trump, this is a guy who peddles anti-Semitic stereotypes. He even invited a white supremacist to Mar-a-Lago.
Americans don't want their kids to be taught in history class that slavery was a jobs program. And if Americans are black or brown, they want to get promoted at work without being derided as a DEI hire for the sin of being successful while not white.
The anticipation, the energy, the exhilaration of once again being on the cusp of a brighter day. The chance to vanquish the demons of fear, division, and hate that have consumed us and continue pursuing the unfinished promise of this great nation, the dream that our parents and grandparents fought and died and sacrificed for. America, hope is making a comeback, and to remind us all not to squander the sacrifices our elders made to give us a better future. See, his limited, narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of two hardworking, highly educated, successful people who happen to be black. I want to know, who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs? Doubling down on ugly, misogynistic, racist lies as a substitute for real ideas and solutions that will actually make people's lives better. It's up to all of us to be the antidote to the darkness and division. We need to overwhelm any effort to suppress us. Michelle Obama is asking you, no, I'm telling y'all to do something.
I am feeling ready to go. An America where we, the people, includes everyone. Because that's the only way this American experiment works. We start thinking that the only way to win is to scold and shame and out-yell the other side. And after a while, regular folks just tune out. Or they don't bother to vote. Now that approach may work for the politicians who just want attention and thrive on division. The rest of the world is watching to see if we can actually pull this off. A restoration of what Lincoln called, on the eve of civil war, our bonds of affection. An America that taps what he called the better angels of our nature. That is what this election is about.
Y'all, welcome to night 3. And tonight is about freedom.
Here's a fact. When Latinos vote, Democrats win. Now, they're trying to suppress our vote. Boo. Our sacred and universal right as Americans.
My father came from Italy as a boy. He was the first kid in the neighborhood to go to college. He served as a navigator during World War II, came home, and at 28 was elected the youngest judge in the history of New York State. What a country.
Hello, my name is Aftab Purval, and I am the first Asian American mayor in the great city of Cincinnati. As a Tibetan refugee, my mom believed deeply in the promise of America. And when I was growing up, she and my dad, who is from India, taught me that when you make a promise, you keep it.
In Wisconsin, keeping promises is important. So is making amends for your mistakes. One of those mistakes happened 60 years ago in a neighborhood called Bronzeville, brimming with black music, black culture, and entrepreneurship. And then came urban renewal and the construction of Interstates 94 and 43, ripping our communities apart. 6th Street was widened and people of color were displaced. Homes destroyed, businesses shuttered, all for a quicker commute. Under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, we're bringing Bronzeville back.
Bright hope is record numbers of black and brown entrepreneurs starting businesses.
From the classroom to the emergency room, Governor DeSantis turned Florida into a testing ground for the right's most egregious, dangerous policies. I can tell you firsthand, it's been devastating for families in my district and across the state. Today in Florida, state policy requires that kids are taught racist lies about so-called benefits of slavery. Books are banned. Teachers are censored.
When I first saw the video of the murder of George Floyd, I was heartbroken. I was angry. And that morning, my phone rang. And on that line was Governor Tim Walz. Tim Walz felt the exact same way I did. And a few days later, Tim appointed me to prosecute Floyd's murder. Almost a year after that, minutes after the guilty verdict came down, my phone rang again. And it was Vice President Kamala Harris calling to congratulate my team and the work. Now, Kamala and Tim, they understand the legacy of George Floyd. No one is above the law, and no one is beneath it.
So there are doubters out there. There are people that doubt our collective strength. They want to tell us how bad we are. They want to say that they alone can save us. Well, we know that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. I believe in America because our fighters fought at Stonewall. Our marchers marched in Selma. Delegates met at Seneca Falls. Every single one of them believed in America, even when America didn't believe in them.
Even though our hearts have been beaten and broken, beyond prayer, I know the importance of action, and now is the time to understand where we are and what it will take to win. Win the broken hearts, win the disenchanted, win the angry spirits. Now is the time.
Will this president bring us together or tear us apart? Will the president increase the peace, security, and stability and freedom that we enjoy and extend it to others as we can? A president can answer that call by saying, I'll do my part, but you have to help me. We have to work together. Or you can dodge what needs to be done by dividing, distracting, and diverting us.
All thanks to President Biden's patriotic vision of a fairer America, doing so with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Joe.
It's your rights. It's our rights. It's our future and freedoms that are on the line. And you have the power to shape the future of this country. Just like our ancestors who fought for freedom on the battlefield and sat in at lunch counters so our kids could stand up.
After watching the Obamas last night, that was some epic fire, wasn't it? Some epic fire. We're now so fired up, we can't wait to leave here and do something. People who seek first to divide and then to conquer. No matter what ship our ancestors arrived on, we are all in the same boat now. Congressman Lewis knew very well how far this country has come because he was one of the brilliant Americans who helped to get us where we are. But he also knew that the work is not done. The work will never be done because freedom isn't free. America is an ongoing project. It requires commitment. It requires being open to the hard work and the heart work of democracy. And every now and then, it requires standing up to life's bullies.
Here's the thing. It's an agenda nobody asked for. It's an agenda that serves nobody except the richest and the most extreme amongst us.
America is not like a blanket, one piece of unbroken cloth, the same color, the same texture, the same size. America is more like a quilt, many patches, many pieces, many colors, many sizes.
So what did you think? I just thought, wow, no wonder they want to keep this race war going in America. It lines their offshore bank accounts with billions of dollars. We're the ones that have to pay for it, but they get the money for it. If you want to follow me and find out more about us at peachgrenade.com,
Drop me a line.
Drop me a line.